It is nothing short of repeated ad nauseum that the Soviet Union had shortages that killed 100 billion people. But the truth is that there were two periods of shortages. At first, at the beginning of the country, when it had been destroyed by World War I, and following the Civil War. During this time, there were shortages in the country that was under reconstruction. The second significant period was around the end of the country. It is this second period that we're going to be looking at. The second period was a result of deliberate choices made by Gorbachev. He intentionally created shortages. A masterful piece on Fort Rust details exactly how Gorbachev carried out this sabotage. We'll begin with a good point about food security. A country is considered food secure if it manages to produce at least 80% of its food supply. If the supply is below 50, then it is considered to be at great risk. As of 2016, Russia was producing 55% of the population's food purchases. During the pre-Gorbachev Soviet era, it was more than 95. What we have to thank for this change was the perestroika. It advocated a system of food coupons, but the real damage was yet to be done. Even in 1987, food production grew faster than population growth and wages. The increase in production when compared with 1980 in the meat industry amounted to 135%, in cheese 131%, in fish 132%, milling 123%. The average salary had increased by 19%. So food production was running full steam, yet all of a sudden the people were switched to what was basically a rationing system. Soon after, there was a terrible difficulty in getting anything. For days, people stood in queues every 3 hours arranging a roll call. Barely anyone didn't fight, wondering where everything had gone, right down to tobacco. If the production was being done, but the products weren't being consumed, then the problem was in distribution. We can only come to one conclusion. This was being done deliberately. How do we know? On the 1st of January 1992, guided shock therapy began, and on January 2nd, the grocery store shelves were already full. Products became more expensive by the day, sometimes by more than 30%. Did production suddenly quadruple literally overnight? No. It was always there to begin with. It was being withheld deliberately. There is a documented speech by first mayor of Moscow, Gavril Popov, in the Inter-Regional Deputy Group, where he claimed it was necessary to create a food situation so that a system of coupons had to be started. This created anger towards the Soviet government. Then the lies came to explain what was going on. Yuri Luzhkov, the chief of Moscow, gave an explanation. We could supply considerably more meat in Moscow to meet the demand, but the front line unloading refrigerated sections do not allow it. Due to a lack of access roads, the refrigerator does not have time to unload. Many believe this lie and set up a way of dealing with it. The workers decided to take matters into their own hands to help. Refrigerated sections with frozen meat can directly use the access roads of Moscow giant factories, like those of Khrushchev rocket science facilities, where about 80,000 people worked in the metallurgical hammer and sickle plant, and the Moscovich with a group of 20,000 and others. Trade committees would have distributed everything and workers would have unloaded it all, but no. In such a scheme, not a single kilogram of meat would reach the dealers. But the workers were unaware. This is the new class of shopkeeper. Shadow businesses grew in the perestroika. This even made it to the national news. The Soviet television program 600 Seconds showed how the trucks from the regions at the entrances to both capitals threw the coupon products into the ditches, as they were not allowed in the city. Trucks with meat and butter came. There are guys to unload, as always students. When they arrived, they are told, take the money and leave pronto. No one must see you here. More of this sabotage came to light in a power struggle between Gorbachev and Yeltsin. Nikolai Ryzhkov, the chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, exposed how Gorbachev one day stopped 26 tobacco factories for repairs of the 28 available, so cigarettes disappeared from the country. It is highly believed that he did this for Yeltsin, who was Gorbachev's main political rival. Mikhail Poltaranin, the former Minister of Press, ally of Yeltsin, ended up becoming chairman, said, "The government's decision on the procurement of imported goods dumped the gold reserves of the Soviet Union. Gold was flowing abroad, and under the guise of foreign, they were categorized as native. For example, in the ports of Leningrad, Riga, Tallinn, ships loaded with cheap feed grain sailed on the sea to Greece, Spain, and came to Odessa with imported food wheat at $120 per ton." Anger towards this kind of fleecing of the Soviet people led to some protests. Here is a sample of how disorganized the economy became. January 1st, 1987, the day of the conception of the party nomenclature of business. Earlier, the monopoly rights of the State Committee, Ministry of Foreign Trade and Economic Relations on Export-Import Operations immediately get 20 ministries and 70 large enterprises. Their guidance and performers were fed by the state. On January 28th, 1987, the creation of the Komsomol economy began. Across the country, under the aegis of the Komsomol Central Committee, the Centers of Scientific and Technical Creativity of Youth are formed. Its aim is to introduce new technology into all spheres across the national economy. It was a goldmine for profit. Less than 6 months later, the law on state enterprises authorized the procedure for which before would have been excluded, the conversion of non-cash money into cash. The exclusive right of cashing was given to the Center of Scientific Technical Creativity of Youth. For the future enrichment of two groups of future business elites, the leadership of state-owned enterprises and the creative centers. The Komsomol economy served people took 18 to 33%. 5% was taken by the Coordinating Council of the City Committee. The effect? The Komsomol involved relatives and acquaintances arranging bogus welfare centers, taking into account the interests of directors. So began the development of corruption schemes. On May 26, 1988, the law on cooperation in the USSR gave the opportunity for the deputies on the ground to establish cooperatives and joint ventures with the foreign companies, mainly for the exportation of goods abroad for the purpose of accumulating currency. There are the first shadowy businesses devoted to the executives of the great parent organization OBKHSS, the KGB, and other security agencies associated with the criminal world. But with countries CMEA, Council for Mutual Economic Assistance, and the Soviet Union, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, the GDR, Mongolia, Vietnam, Albania, Cuba, international settlements were conducted in transferable rubles. The cost of one was 0.987412 grams of pure gold. It was kind of the first virtual solid supranational currency in the world, not subject to cashing. In 1990, Gorbachev and Rishkov forced the CMEA to make a decision about trade conducted only in dollars. The CMEA had no dollars. They were all bailed out by the IMF and World Bank. By creating demand for U.S. money, Gorbachev deprived their home country markets and planned revenues and gave the U.S. control over the entire zone of influence of the USSR. This affected the food market. The newly born bourgeoisie started to remove everything from butter, fish, meat, cereals, condensed milk, sugar, and dried fruit from their warehouses. And not only CMEA countries, for example, in exchange for currency and business trips, the meat from Bashkirika was sent by echelons not only to Germany, but also Great Britain, as well as Africa and India. On the 26th of December 1999, the USSR ceased to exist, and in the morning, the law on urgent measures of implementing land reform in the RSFSR came to power. The compulsory mass accelerated decollectivization and planting in the villages of criminal and oligarch capitalism began. From there, Yeltsin, newly elected, began to sell off agricultural land to foreigners. What did this add up to? In 1990, the expense of the government reserves, 50% of food needs of the population, subsidized regions of the countries were covered. Expenditure of a year's supply of companies with 4 years. This is equal to the expenditure of a year's supply compares with 4 years of the Great Patriotic War. This measure prevented social explosion. At the moment, the state reserves can provide for each inhabitant of the country for the next 3 months. In 1992, Russia was officially categorized as a half-starved country. An average person in the country ate only about 2,040 calories per day. With reasonable medicines, 260,000 calories. According to the World Food Organization, the intake of 2,150 kilocalories meant constant malnutrition. In the USSR, the level of per capita consumption amounted to 2,590. In the US, it was 3,350. There was no collapse, only sabotage.
Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.